Mad Max. To understand, you must go back to when the world was powered by the black fuel. And welcome to Nostalgia, a chronological exploration of every NES game released in North America. I'm Mike.
And this is Sean.
And it's just the two of us today, but that's fine because Joe probably has never seen Mad Max and therefore, wouldn't be at all helpful to the conversation.
We don't know that. Joe, have you seen Mad Max?
It's just a trend. It's a trend of usually any kind of 80s movie or whatever. Not a trend for Joe specifically, but just for us. It's we either didn't see the movie or we've only heard of it or we watched it a long time ago and we're just not willing to put in the commitment to watch the movie and play the game in the same week. That's just a crazy commitment. How can you expect us to do that?
Well, I have seen the movie and I'm actually a big fan of the franchise. I don't know about you.
Which movie though, Sean? Because do you assume that because this is Mad Max that it is based off the first movie?
It definitely isn't. But I've seen them all, and I could tell you that this is the closest we got here it's like a mix between Road Warrior and Beyond Thunderdome here.
Okay, all right. And what is the biggest draw of the Mad Max universe? And don't say Mel Gibson.
You mean just the world in general, not the game?
Yeah, what's the hook to the franchise? What makes people say Mad Max is cool because blank?
And there's a lot of things, man. There's just the aesthetic, it basically codified the wasteland post-apocalypse setting aesthetic. There's the fucking cars that the very creative ways that they just put junkers together and just make them awesome. That just the whole thing with vehicular combat and the 20 to 30 minute long scenes of just pure mayhem that are usually practicals. It's a unique. There's nothing like it in film.
And I think you really hit it right away too with the wasteland aesthetic. That's what I think of for Mad Max. So I feel especially recently with Fury Road and then the Furiosa follow-up, Mad Max is bigger than ever. Probably bigger than it was in the 80s just because of Fury Road just taking that aesthetic of, post-apocalyptic wasteland and really just dialing it all up and really leaning into it. And like you were saying with the vehicular combat stuff, it's obviously that should be the game's focus too, but it is a huge draw for the movies. It's what I've never seen a Need for Speed movie, but I would hope that most of the Need for Speed isn't actually the racing like it is in the games and that there's actually some really cool destruction going on because that's what I want to see fast cars do. I want to see them do crazy destructive things, not crazy slick things oh, look at that stop before it explodes. It's no, explode.
Yeah, I mean, so in the game here, we got the Interceptor. It might look a little, cartoony, but I think that's one of the most iconic cars in movies. Is just this matte black fucked up Interceptor. I don't actually know what the actual model of the car is, but I'm glad that it's at least they attempted it here.
Yeah, it kind of looks like a Hot Wheel.
Yeah,
with the graphics. No, in a good way. In a good way. Hot Wheels are sick. I'll say it. I still have some Hot Wheels somewhere in an attic. And I think that's fine because, again, just to start, forget about the game. Since we're saying that, the big draw of Mad Max is this post-apocalyptic atmosphere, how well does the game translate those movie visuals? It's 8-bit pixel art. So can it get it done?
So I'd say this is it's surprising, the level to which this actually feels like Mad Max, because I wasn't expecting it to even feel like it at all. And I'm not saying that this is that this is a masterpiece or like a definitive video game representation of Mad Max, but it actually does feel like a method of gameplay with enough aesthetic hooks and like not so much callbacks, but it's at least thematically there. It does feel like a Mad Max game.
I think the wasteland itself, the part of the game where you are just driving around in the car, and they are level based, but let's just say it's at that point you're just driving around the open wasteland looking for these either mazes or progression points. That part definitely gets the aesthetic right. I think once you get into I don't even know if they're mazes or mines or whatever. Like once you get into that,
like buildings and like bunkers. I think they're bunkers.
Right. Yeah, once you get into that, that's where it starts to just like not lean into Mad Max and just kind of be like, well, we have to do something, with Max on foot and a reason to get out of the car. So we designed all this. That feels kind of empty and barren, which maybe is great for the wasteland aesthetic. But I felt like that was the moment where, okay, now game design got in the way of franchise goals.
And I do think that it was smart to have there be another mode of play. Even today, the most recent, I think the only other Mad Max game, the listeners can correct me later, which was, I think, for the PS3 generation / 360. Maybe it was, I don't know. Yeah, no, it was definitely like a PS3 game. The main focus was the car combat, and then they also had on-foot sections with like some Batman Arkham combat because they couldn't think of anything else. And it's sort of an afterthought. And this, yes, the walking on foot stuff is an afterthought. It's kind of like the art style gets a little weird, and you end up like shooting guys that look more like old-timey, like gangstery than wasteland, like bandit look to them. I'm not sure why. But you're looking for food and water, so at least that's thematically appropriate, or fuel, or bullets. But yeah, there's not really much to it, and it's kind of ridiculously easy. So you can gloss over those sections, really.
And when you're driving around in the Interceptor, naturally it's not a barren wasteland. There are other vehicles out to get you, and that kind of creates one of the core mechanics of the game is the vehicular combat. And as you're driving around the wasteland, you take care of enemy cars, but then it becomes a like a showdown to progress to the next level where you have to be the last car standing. And, there's like little trap doors hidden around the place. Other cars are trying to ram you off the stage, and you have to take care of them. And that part, I don't really know Twisted Metal as a franchise that well, but like to me, that was like the nearest adjacent I could think of. Is like, wow, this is like,
no, you're right.
This is like 5-7 years before Twisted Metal, but it's doing it.
Well, what's funny is that when you're out on not the world map, but when you're out on like the wasteland sections, you have like a weapon. You can throw dynamite at people, and that feels very Twisted Metal. But then when you go into these sort of showdown, once you've collected enough supplies and you go to the gas station to get your pass to basically Car Thunderdome, then that's like, no, this is actually like a fight to the death, and then you don't have any weapons. So it like in different sections of the car gameplay, it sort of it reflects different things of what Twisted Metal would eventually be, but it's like kind of scattered throughout the game. But I agree that you can kind of see where that's coming from in this game.
But Twisted Metal obviously was, it had multiple characters with different vehicles that you could choose from. There were different weapons and abilities for said cars. The Interceptor obviously is the only choice for Mad Max to drive around in. So does that feel like something that gets beefier, like that you tune up? Should it have been something where the car starts out as like a beater piece of shit, and by the end of it, it graphically looks different? Like, should they have went for something like that?
No, I think that, if we're talking about a franchise game, and when we're on the NES, where there's less like, I'm not going to say creativity, but there's less like of a technical ability to play around with these things. I think it just has to be the Interceptor. If it were any other car, it would be, what is this? Just Mach Rider? Like, what world is this in? Right. Like, really, the only thing that is telling you that this is definitively Mad Max and not just a generic wasteland is the Interceptor.
Did we ever talk about how, like, the Mach Rider world is similar to Mad Max? Did we ever bring that comparison up?
I'm pretty sure in the episode we talked about it.
Okay, good, because that feels like something that, while playing, I never even thought of, but you saying Mach Rider, I feel it right away. Obviously, two totally different games from a gameplay perspective. For lack of a better word, resource management of this game, right? You were mentioning you pick up food and water and ammo and gas, and you gotta, kind of not necessarily. It's not a simulation level, but like you do have to be on top of those things.
Yeah.
It is weird that two of the resources in the game, food and water, act as currency, and that both are interchangeable. They cost, they're the same thing. So whether you're picking up water or you're picking up food, it's all going into the same bucket of currency.
Yeah, it is. From a purely game design perspective, it's strange. It makes sense, and I think it would be very weird if you showed up to this place, bought your ticket via bartering food and water, and having a shit ton of food wasn't like come on, just cut me a break here. It just sort of begs the question, why did they separate them out, and why not just have like supplies in general? But I don't know, it works ish.
I would have valued the water more. Like, we're in a wasteland. I would think that the water should have been like 10 points for the food's 5.
Oh, so okay. That's an interesting take.
You can go like 40 days without food, right? It's water that you like need pretty quick.
I think it depends on like, how much food you normally have before that too. I'm not a nutrition scientist.
If Max got really desperate, he could start eating the car.
The leather seats, at least.
Yeah, exactly. We kind of talked about the mine I keep calling them mines. I don't know, like the sub levels where you're max on foot. But basically, scattered throughout all these wastelands are it's like small little entrances to a much larger maze area where you have to basically run around and really like strut around, right? What's up with that? Like that walk, but the walk is different too, though. There's like the walk north-south versus east-west.
Yeah.
And like he struts north to south, but he like runs east to west.
They have some really weird perspective going on here, where it just like doesn't work for a top-down perspective when you're walking up and down. It's totally fine left and right, but they get him really like bow-legged when you're walking up and down, and he walks really funny. Like his feet, one foot always has to be on the ground. It's goofy. It's very goofy looking. Also, both of his arms have sleeves, and only one is supposed to have a sleeve.
Ooh. Can't believe this game got made.
It's on the front. It's on the first thing that you see is like an 8-bit crunched version, like that iconic Mel Gibson Road Warrior freaking jacket picture. And you can see that there's one sleeve. And in the game, when you're walking around as Mad Max, he's got 2 sleeves. It's ridiculous.
There is no multiplayer in this game, which sounds kind of silly, right? That like, oh, no multiplayer. But like, think about it. Could have been a big plus for just like choose your vehicle and taking that arena mode where you have to be the last car standing and doing something with either a second player or using the 4 score to have a 4-player battle. I think it's something that should have at least been considered. Probably was and just left out for time or because the franchise wasn't a huge priority or something. But I think it was something that was missing from this game.
I kind of wonder how that would work out because the camera is really only gives you enough real estate to really focus on the one guy. Like, would it then be a completely different like rendering system where all the cars are smaller? Or is everyone just on the screen, or are there a bunch of really tiny like split screens going on?
Yeah, there's a bunch of really tiny split screens, right?
Okay.
I mean, we've seen that before with at least 2-player options where there is now a sudden split screen view. Usually cut horizontally. What's your take on that? Horizontal or vertical split screens?
I think it depends on the kind of game. If this were an FPS, actually no. I think even when I'd play split screen Twisted Metal, vertical's better because
I agree.
Yeah. You're never gonna have that peripheral vision anyway. So
it's so much easier to be you're the guy on the left, like when you're telling your friend or your dad who's playing for the first time, like, yeah, you're the one on the left, rather than like you're the one up top. Like what?
But same with first-person shooters. I would much prefer to be left-right than up-down.
And to go back to the game, I mean, that really is the core loop of it. You explore the wasteland to find the maze of each level, to pick up the key, to move into the arena, to take down all the cars, to then enter the next portion of the wasteland. And there is no, the movie obviously is a more character-driven narrative. There's like no narrative here on Max. There's no statement about it. You're just dumped into the next level, and that's the way that the game goes until the very end of the game, where there's this weird final battle that does not have
wrestler,
any,
right?
Yeah, it does not have any sort of finality feeling to it. It's not like any other moment in the game, but you are just like he's shooting at you and you're shooting back at him, and you just have to move out of the way of his bullets and shoot your bullets and hope he walks into them or time them right. Like, it's not even complicated, right? Like, it's really not that hard. I'm saying the getting there is probably harder than the fight.
No, I actually didn't get far enough to actually get into this fight. I just watched a video of it, and I'm glad I did, because the game, like, okay, just moving away from this fight real quick. You do this, what Mike just described, this loop, like 5 times until you finally get to this boss. And those 5 times, you're doing the exact same thing. You're finding the supplies, you're buying the pass, you're doing the like arena mode, and then you get to this. So the payoff really isn't there. The guy is obviously based off of Lord Humongous, at least with the mask. And I guess he's got like crossbows. Now you have a crossbow. Don't know why, but it's really to make that like a mini game to end the game is very silly. It's all just very silly.
You touched on a pet peeve of mine there, Sean, but it is true. These early games don't get a pass on like you suddenly have a weapon that you never had before, and it's like you could have at least made the 5th stage of the wasteland. You have to like buy the crossbow to move on, right? You could have at least like narratively done it that way, right? Or put it in a cutscene, an explanation. But to just no introduction, you're just dropped into a fight, and you could never shoot anybody while you were, you never had to shoot anybody in, like, the game didn't look like that in any of the other modes. And now all of a sudden it's this, like you said, mini game. It just feels like a really random ending. Whereas I would have thought, make it like some crazy, much larger vehicle that you have to like somehow knock off and take off in the arena in like a 1v1 would have been more suitable to like what the game was throwing down, because the game focuses so hard on the vehicle aspects of it that it feels kind of weird to just be like, and at the end, the Interceptor is nothing and Max is behind it all.
I'd say if it was sort of like a smaller arena, because those arena levels are massive for no reason. And then, but it's sort of like those maps like those matches that you play throughout the game, but they just gave you like the dynamite back, and maybe the final boss's vehicle has some different kind of weapon that you have to like. It's within the abilities of this game to do that. It's not like you have to change the generation of video game system for that to be a possibility. Like in some instances where we recommend something different. It's just a weird decision.
Sean, you mentioned the Mad Max 2015 video game, which is the only released not sequel, but other game in the franchise. There were other games in the works. Apparently a Mad Max Asylum and Mad Max Autorama were two of them, but they never made it out the door. There was one game that did make it out the door for Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis called Outlander, but it was like pitched as a Mad Max video game, but instead they had to they couldn't get the license, so they stripped all that stuff out, and obviously like the game is spiritually in the same vein. It is a vehicular combat game, but just no actual references to...
What game was that?
Outlander? It's like a 16-bit follow-up. So
okay.
If you have any interest in, you played this version of Mad Max and wanted to see where they would take it, Outlander would be the one to check out. But I have never played the 2015 Mad Max video game, but when I think of Mad Max video games, I think of Rage 2.
Yeah.
Like, doesn't that feel like it's Fury Road inspired?
I mean, I think of a lot of games when I think of Mad Max. I mean, a lot of the marketing for Fallout 3 was really, really leaning on imagery from Mad Max. And I know it's not the Australian outback, it's just DC in the outskirts, but they really leaned into it there. Rage, definitely. Rage, I would say, matches up more with like the Fury Road and later feel,
because the vehicles are crazy, and it has the punks, with the all the battle gear on.
But no, I
face
agree.
Paint.
Yeah.
So was that Mad Max 2015 video game? Since you're the unfortunate expert of it on this episode, was that anything like it was before Fury Road, right? So it wouldn't have had any inspiration.
So it's
there,
funny. It was developed alongside Fury Road, and actually, the two teams. Well, I mean, not that they were equal, but there was a lot of dailies coming from the set of Fury Road that was going directly to the developer, so they were able to like Immortan Joe is named. This is like one of his sons that is the main villain in this one. The War Boys are all there. There's a lot of it's basically the same map that they reference a lot of the places in the newer games. So it's that. And I'd say it's a flawed game, but it's actually I'd say it's a fun game, and they actually nail vehicular combat pretty well. So I'd say it's overlooked sometimes.
Huh. That's cool. And I only have one interesting thing to add, just because I'm skimming the development page for it, is that it was originally like George Miller was involved in like a true tie-in Mad Max video game, but then I guess either left the project or
he didn't like where it was going.
Yeah, right, left the project. But then so this game is not that game that he was working on, or you think
no, it's not.
Was okay.
I mean,
cool.
It's technically the same title. I mean, as much as a game that goes through so many iterations and is in development hell for a long time can be the same game, it's technically the same continuous development, but this is not the game that was, like, it didn't have the feature set that game would have had.
Got it. Very interesting, very surprising. I think Mad Max is certainly one of those that lends itself to video game adaptations, but so would like the Terminator franchise, right? And you don't see like too many Terminator games. Like they exist, but there's not like
they're not good.
or it's just not like as many as you would think. Like I think there's a lot of these 80s action movies that the NES like was almost like obligated to have because they were, at the time, like they were expected to, break off from the movie, release a video game. Fans of the movie would then buy the game, and it's just like another revenue stream. That's not like true though of like, oh, well then we also have to do that. Like we have to make a Mad Max Super Nintendo game. We have to make a Mad Max N64 game. It's like it never happened. It didn't continue that trend. Instead,
it was funny, like, because I had to remind myself, like, when this game was released, because I'm like, oh, this is just going to be some kind of Mad Max 1 thing. And I'm like, that's the movie that lends itself the least to a video game because it was so low budget. He couldn't do what he wanted to do. But no, this is 1990, so they have Mad Max, Road Warrior, and Thunderdome to work off of. And just another one of those situations, not as crazy as we've had in the past of like, it's 1990, why are we making a Mad Max game? In the same way of like, it's 1990, why are we making a Gilligan's Island game? Like,
right.
But it's still a question. It's still there.
And there's only one question that remains on this episode, and that is whether Mad Max will be on the Essential Games list. As far as movie tie-in video games go, this is pretty solid. I do feel like it's mostly inspired / connected to the movie franchise, and I can tell that that's the Interceptor, and I can follow with the vehicular combat stuff. What I can't get over is just that the gameplay loop itself is pretty stale after the first time you do it. It's a little disappointing to not have like one giant wasteland that you kind of explore, backtrack through when you buy new stuff at a shop that now, like not Metroid, but kind of Metroid-y, something like that. And instead just being like, no, it's just like we gated off the next section of the wasteland that looks exactly like this section, but just, we moved some buildings and changed the directions of the roads. I can't in good conscience say that that's a smart design choice for a video game. So while I like how connected this feels to the franchise itself, probably even more than Gilligan's Island, which was also feeling pretty good as far as franchise games goes. I think video game developers in general right now are learning the right lessons about like not doing the Back to the Future thing of just like, yeah, if you just like loosely tell the story and make gameplay elements around those story beats, you'll have a great movie video game. It's like, no, that's not the way to do it. But this isn't necessarily the way to go either. You can't just lay down some great ideas, but not follow through on the full experience. There's not a full experience to this game. And so for that reason, it won't be on the Essential Games list for me. Sean?
Yeah, I agree. I've been pretty generous to this game just because I really like the IP. And I was just surprised that they actually tried to make it about that car combat and not just like a side scroller where there's like some enemies that kind of look like characters from the movies, like kind of Mike was saying, less mini game. I thought it was going to be more side scrollery. So yeah, I really admire that they tried. But even when you're playing, like, we never really got into the feel of the game aside from the goofy walk in the bunkers. But even when you're driving around, like it doesn't feel great. There's so many different things that you can run into, or like oil slicks, and that there's a lot of frustration in the driving that I think, maybe thematically makes sense, but does it make it a fun game? I don't know. So yeah, not essential, still cool. Play the 2015 game.
All right, that's it. You've heard it, and I gotta say, Sean, really appreciated your Mad Max knowledge here. Maybe in the future, we should pick an expert for each franchise before we review the games. Like you're the guy. You're gonna watch all the films before tonight's episode.
Do we draw straws?
Yeah. What's the next franchise video game that's coming out? Who's gonna have to watch all of what? Let's take a look here. It's a lot of episodes. You got to scroll down this list pretty far. I guess we could play the next person. Next week's episode's Pictionary, so maybe Joe could play like every version of Pictionary ever released.
We've been looking forward to this. Yeah.
Yeah, so he could do that. Dick Tracy. So who wants to watch?
I nominate Joe.
Yep. Joe will consume all Dick Tracy media, of which I'm sure there's plenty. There's Dick Tracy comics gotta be like hundreds of those, if not thousands, right?
I thought it was more 30s? Like a paperback thing, like or really short novellas. Those were okay. Comics? Is that what they were?
I thought they were comics.
Oh, okay.
Dick Tracy was,
shows you how much I know.
Not like DC comics though, right? Like, I thought he was like newspaper.
Maybe. I don't know.
Which is funny because like Superman had a newspaper comic, Spider-Man had a newspaper comic. It's just like people didn't care about those. Like,
I mean, what
who's
can
collecting
you do with
like
those like 6 panels?
Right. Who's being like, I have the first Spider-Man newspaper strip. Like nobody's buying that.
You might.
I would.